So on the 11th of January 2010, again I had the forewarning. I was on a bus, a London bus, a double-decker upstairs, and early in the morning, and I saw a hearse in the street. And when I saw the hearse, I just burst into tears. And I absolutely couldn't understand my reaction, and I was that was 2 years after my sister died, so I was much more in integration. I was feeling okay, so I really couldn't understand my reaction. And that morning I had woken up and I was writing about where I was, and I had actually written about my night, and I had expressed hatred, absolute hatred for that night, and how that night had challenged me at a level of absolute hatred that I couldn't really understand, but this is what I had written. Then I see this hearse, I burst into tears, and I'm like, I can't really rationally make sense. Come back home and the phone rings, and it's my dad on the phone, and my dad asked me if I was aware that the night before in Haiti there had been a very important earthquake. And when I got the news of the earthquake, I fell into a rage because Haiti is a country that has suffered a lot, humanly, politically, economically, for several centuries. And now on top of it, there was this huge earthquake. So the only thing I knew was there had been a huge earthquake affecting Port-au-Prince, and I have family in Port-au-Prince. There was the husband of my sister, Misha, a very important person in my life. There was the father of my own child. I had my nephews. I had lots of friends. I had lived in Port-au-Prince. I knew about Haiti since I was 12 years old. Misha was a very important person in my life since I was 12. So there was the not being able to note the extent of the damage. There was not yet media coverage, really. I didn't have a TV, so I didn't have access to media coverage. There was no more communication possible with Haiti. You couldn't pick up a phone and ring. There was no more communication. So I knew we had to wait. And it was just awful. So for me, the worst scenario was that Misha had been killed. That for sure, that for me was the worst scenario, because I'd known him since I was 12. He was a very important person in my life. He had been the husband of my sister. He was there when Cathy died. That was something I absolutely couldn't comprehend. So as the hours passed and I was exposed to media coverage through the TV, and I realized the extent of the destruction, beyond my own anxiety, my own suffering, there was the acknowledgement that that was a catastrophe on a much, much bigger scale than just my own, but my own was part of that massive scale of destruction and death and losses. And so as I embarked on that period of waiting to finally get information from what was happening in Haiti, I had to deal with my rage. I was very afraid of myself. I was actually afraid that if I got the news that Misha died in the earthquake, I was going to trash everything in my house. I felt I'm going to be capable of actually breaking everything in my house out of my rage and my incapacity of accepting this event. So that I was very afraid of that, of my own reaction. I also put like an inner wall. I wanted to wall myself. And again, there was a strange duality where I'm a mom, I have friends who are supporting me, so I was in interaction with the outside world. But really inside of me, I put a wall around me, and I put myself inside that wall, and I didn't want to have to communicate with another human being anymore. I just wanted to be walled. And we waited for nearly 48 hours. And at one point the phone rang, and when I took the phone, I heard the voice of the father of my daughter. And that's it. So I knew he was alive. And then we waited, and on the second day, again, at one point I got very angry at myself. I got angry at myself for passively just waiting, and I was like, wow, you're sensitive, you so-called psychic and are clairvoyant and all of that, so just be proactive and go in a trance and connect with Misha and be proactive and figure out what's going on. But that just passively waiting was just awful. So I went on my bed, and I went into a trance-like state, or a deep relaxation, and I connected with Misha, and very clearly I got the sensation that Misha was buried. Misha was buried alive under rubble, and he was alive, and suddenly he wasn't alive, and it was a bit confusing. But I got the very clear sensation that yes, Misha was under rubbles. Yeah, by then we had the official news that Misha Gaillard was considered as dead in the earthquake, because Misha was part of a program to reform the judiciary system in Haiti. He was a political figure. He was quite an important figure in Haiti in terms of reforming and rebuilding a political system there. So in the American press, it had come out that he was considered as having died in the earthquake. So my dad had told me, okay, Misha is officially considered dead in the earthquake. And I refused to believe that. I refused to believe any official information, and I was like, I will believe it only when I have the news from someone I can relate to. And I think it was through Twitter or something like that, some very odd way of communicating, that finally we got the information on that second day, after I did the remote viewing, that yes, he had passed away. And the story being that his children, who were 17 and 19 at the time, were in their house, which was a wooden gingerbread house, so they were still alive. And the following day, after the first night after the earthquake, they went to the site where the Ministry of Justice was, because they guessed that Misha must have been in the ministry, and everything was destroyed. And by shouting and all of that, they found Misha, and they could actually speak to Misha. Misha was buried under the ruins of the Ministry of Justice, but they could communicate. And it took them 2 days to finally, with some friends, be able to go back and start removing rubbles. It was very complicated, apparently. I can imagine the entire city was destroyed and covered in rubbles, but also covered with dead bodies. There is an estimated 500,000 of people who were killed. So on that second morning, when finally they managed to come to Misha, who was actually from his leg down completely crushed and completely covered in dust, the only thing they could do was wash his face with water and just put a tiny bit of water on his lips, and he died. In one way, it's very beautiful because he was reunited with his children. He was reunited with the outside world. He didn't die on his own. On the other level, it's very painful. He spent nearly 48 hours buried alive and crushed. His legs were apparently completely crushed. Anyway, they managed to completely undug his body and bury him in their garden. So I had the confirmation of my remote viewing that yes, he had been buried, yes, he was buried alive, then at one point he died. He very quickly moved from the state of being alive to dying. I have a friend who went to Port-au-Prince within the few days after the earthquake. He's a documentary filmmaker specialized on natural disaster. And he's also a sensitive person like me. And when he was in Port-au-Prince, very quickly he got the sense that there were a lot of souls who had died, but who hadn't realized they had died. So they were just kind of like hanging above Port-au-Prince and in an absolute state of confusion. And they seemed to be going towards the cathedral, which was also destroyed, because this is where he felt that phenomena the most. And he spontaneously decided to do some sort of ceremony to help those souls move on. So he went back one evening on his own accord with his cameraman and a photographer to spontaneously do something, because it was extremely overwhelming for him to feel all those souls in that state of confusion. So he went by the cathedral and he spontaneously did what he felt like doing. And whilst he was doing his ceremony, his photographer was photographing him. And you can see the cathedral, and then you can see the cathedral literally as if it's in snow, under snow, because it's covered in orbs. Again, those balls, those spheres, like when Cathy came to see me. So many of them, it's like it's snowing. And then you can see another type of orbs coming who are different, who are archangels, guides, who knows. We can put words, but we don't really know. It doesn't really matter. But the phenomena is there, and the phenomena is taken on photo. And suddenly, shoof, they're all gone. And again, there is no more orbs, no more nothing, only the cathedral. So that was very interesting when I connected with Misha after he had died. I think it was probably 9 months after Misha died. I had the spontaneous connection with both him and Cathy, actually. And I very much felt that for Misha, there was not only the fact that he had died himself, but there was also the awareness in those 40 so hours when he was dying, buried alive, of the weight of those hundreds of thousands of other people who had died. In the space of several days, hundreds of thousands, like 500,000 people died. And he was not just dying himself, but he was very aware of that. So when finally he died, it's like his soul, his spirit had not was dealing not just with the trauma of his own death, but the general trauma of collective death. So when I connected with him, all those months later, which was a very spontaneous connection, I didn't want it, it just happened. He was actually being healed. He was being healed at that level of his own trauma, the way he had died, but also the trauma of dying with lots of people dying at the same time. And there was lots of different him, if I can put it like that. So there was his physical body who was buried in the garden. And it was good, it was in the garden, it was good his physical body hadn't been moved a lot because of the level of trauma. So his physical body was there and was very much in need of just resting and not being moved and be able to integrate his death and the death of all those people. Then there was another frequency of him where he was lying on a bed of crystal light, if I can describe it like that, a frequency of matter that doesn't exist on this plane. So it's like matter but not matter, and it retains the quality of light. And he was lying on that, and around him there were beings of light, which I couldn't see their body, I could only perceive their clothing, which in a way wasn't clothing, was again layers of light or layers of density that were giving them a shape. And those beings were healing that vibrational body who was in that bed of crystal, again from his own trauma of his own death and the trauma of dying with lots of people. And there was again another frequency of Misha who was standing by the bed of crystal and observing. And the way that vibration of Misha was observing was with profound compassion. He had profound compassion for his physical body in the garden, who was buried in the garden. He had profound compassion for all the other people who had been killed, for his country. But when he was looking at that aspect of himself that was on that bed of crystal light, he had profound compassion for who he had been as a human being, with his flaws, with his strengths, with the full aspect of who he had been, the shadow aspect and the light aspect, where he had failed, where he had succeeded. I could just feel this incredible compassion, this incredible no judgments, an inability to look at every single detail of his life with this deep, deep love and compassion. I feel very moved when I talk about that. And then there was yet again another layer of him, which was completely detached from a sense of body, where he was with his children who were at the time living in Canada, and again he was there with them as a presence. Again as a compassionate presence, not as like I need to take care of them, or I need to do something, or a sense of guilt or blame, or nothing like that. Just like pure, loving, compassion presence. And then he was with me in my lounge. I was working at my computer, it was the afternoon, and there was also one aspect of him that was there with me. And there was Cathy, and Cathy was with us as well. And very strangely, the way I perceive Cathy, so she was with us in my lounge. Me, I was still at my computer, I didn't move from my computer. But again, like with my late husband, the way I could perceive her was at a level of planetary scale, so something gigantic, and there was a kind of like planetary rise, like a sunrise, except it wasn't the sun, it was like a planet or something like a planet, and this planet was rising. And again, there was a sense of oneness, no more separation to what was that planet rising, what was that kind of other planet that was creating the horizon, the presence of my sister in that rising, and the presence of me in being able to again have the privilege to witness and share something like that, while still being in my lounge, while still having Cathy and Misha with me. So that was a very, very privileged moment to be able to live that. Felt very healing to be with them, to understand the level of healing that Misha had to go through and the level of support and profound compassion. For my sister, it was a sense of oneness, that she was somewhere completely different, but there was oneness, total oneness. I don't want to say anymore.